Well, welcome everyone. And it's really exciting because all the things that guys have been talking about this morning, some of the words that we've heard, are all relevant to what I'm going to talk about, okay? Which is not really surprising, knowing our Father, because God lives, right? And he speaks to us. He speaks to us in our lives and he changes things. I was sharing my testimony recently with someone actually, and I was saying that. I said, well, I wouldn't believe if there was no response. I wouldn't believe if I didn't know that God lives, that Jesus lives, that he changes things. And so today we're continuing our series on John's Gospel. We've been looking at who Jesus is, what he said, what he did, and what that means for us today. And today we're looking at the story of Lazarus in the Bible, which is in John chapter 11, verses 1 to 44. If you want to follow along, get your Bibles out. And we're going to look at the reactions and perspectives of some of those people involved and what that tells us about the Lord and how that now plays out in our lives. I'm going old school today. We're going to jump straight in. I've even got a Bible with me. And we're going to read through. We're going a bit Wesleyan. We're going to read through. We're going to stop along the way and we're going to just squeeze as much life and goodness out of the scripture as we can. We're going to feast on it. And I also felt as I was preparing this that the Lord gave me some encouragement, some words. So I'm going to share those as we go along as well. Okay, so if you're there, it's chapter 11. The death of Lazarus. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Well, the first thing that struck me reading that is that Jesus let Lazarus die. He let Lazarus die. It's like, woo, that's a bit uncomfortable. Where's Mr. Nice Jesus? You know, he knew that Lazarus would die. He knew that he would pass through this illness and this disease, that he'd struggle with that, and his body would lose, and he'd pass through, and he'd go through the passage of death. He knew that Mary and Martha, whom he loved, would suffer the agony of watching their brother pass away. And incidentally, for those two sisters, for their brother to pass away, that was a big deal in those days. That was a big deal. You know, he was the man of the house, basically. And that was very significant in those days. So they were losing a lot. Now, Jesus knew that Lazarus ultimately would live. Bit of a spoiler alert there for anyone who doesn't know the story of Lazarus. But no one else did at the time. And the sisters, they knew Jesus enough that they knew that he could heal. So they sent word to him. They knew that he was their hope, and they sent word out. And they said, Lord, you know, our brother is ill. He's going to die. And Jesus said, yes, but this does not lead to death. It will not lead to death. Now, it's perfectly feasible that those messengers would have gone back to those sisters and would have delivered that message back to them. And they would have heard those words, and that would have brought them a great deal of comfort and peace and security. It won't lead to death. God will be glorified. Wow. So imagine how they felt when Lazarus died. Did Jesus lie? Did he make a mistake? You know, how could that have happened? So just bear that in mind, the sisters, what they would have been dealing with. Just bear that in mind as we carry on and read further. So verses 7 to 16, I'm not going to dig into it all because we don't have enough time. I'll try and keep it fairly short. Pour yourself a G&T. So basically, this is where Jesus says, right, we're going to go back to Judea. Lazarus has fallen asleep. And the disciples are brilliant. They're like a bunch of mums. They're like, oh, no, if he's asleep, don't go wake him up because he'll get better, won't he? You know, that's what we need to do. Just let the boy rest. And Jesus is like, no, he's dead. He's basically dead. And for your sake, I'm glad that we weren't there, that you may believe. And Thomas, bless Thomas, he says, because Jesus was basically a sort of threat of death if he went back to Judea, because the Jews there were trying to stone him, they were trying to kill him, and he crossed the Jordan to get away. So the disciples understandably were like, well, if you go back there, then they'll just get you and you'll die. Thomas says to his fellow disciples, well, let us go as well, and we'll just die with him. It's an interesting response. And in one way, it's very admirable. He knew enough of Jesus to know that he needed to follow Jesus. He'd seen enough of Jesus to know that he was something and he wanted to follow, but he didn't have that faith that had been awakened. He didn't know that Jesus was walking by the will and the purpose of the Father, that Jesus knew that no one could touch him unless he laid down his own life. So verses 17 to 27 is Martha's response, and this is really key. Now, when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. So he'd been dead 4 days. They'd done all of the burial, they'd done all the ceremony, they'd done all the binding and wrapping up and burial cloth, and he'd been in the tomb. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. So when Martha heard that Jesus was on his way, she went out to meet him. She very proactively, she got up, she went out to meet him. It reminded me of Elijah when he was in the cave. When he heard that little whisper, he just got up straight away and went to the mouth of the cave. There was that really active response. And Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now, I don't know if she was saying that. If you'd been here, he never would have died. I don't know if it was that kind of accusation thing. Could it be? I don't think it was. I think she was stating fact. I think she was reiterating. She was declaring, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. She knew who Jesus was. Listen to the second line. But even now, I know, even now. Now that even now is really key, right? Because Lazarus has died. Martha is aware of that. She's not in fairy tale land. She has gone through all the practicalities of death and burial and placing Lazarus in the tomb. She knows. She's aware of reality. She holds reality. She's grounded. She's very earthed in that. But she looks at that reality through the lens of faith. And it's her faith that raises hope and expectation. She says, but even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. That is her faith, asking Jesus to raise her brother from the dead, because she knows that is a possibility. And Jesus says immediately to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha says, well, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And that's her just displaying a great awareness of the scriptures. So Martha would have grown up. She's very studious. She knows that at the last day that everyone will rise. And then Jesus says to her, yes, I am the resurrection and the life. See, Jesus is starting to reveal who he truly is, the Messiah. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. And then he turns to her and says, do you believe this? Do you believe this? And she says to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. Now look at that. Do you believe this? It's the belief is the key. And I just felt when I was praying this, I had this word, and it's to those, and you'll know who you are, it's to those who have lost something. And to those whose lives are not showing the promises that God has spoken clearly, and whose reality does not reflect what they know God has spoken. And Jesus says to you, do you still believe? Do you believe me? Do you trust me? Raise your faith and your hope. Raise your expectation. Wait well and get on. Wait well and get on. Martha didn't just sit around and didn't leave Lazarus out in the open and not attend him. No, she was getting on. Okay, now that reality didn't square up with what she thought and knew, but she was getting on. Wait well and get on. Wait in joy and peace and hope. So now we're going to go on to the other sister's reaction. We're going to look at Mary's reaction, which is verses 28 onwards. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now again, Mary didn't go out to find Jesus, but when she was called by him, she got up quick and went. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but still in the place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who were in the house consoling her, so Mary's very, very upset, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So she fell at his feet weeping, saying, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now there's no second line with Mary. Martha and Mary's responses were identical, apart from Mary didn't have that second line. Martha was showing faith, and it was expressing itself as hope. Mary was staying in the realities of the grief of the death of her brother, and was staying in that weeping. Now, I'm not saying weeping's wrong. If you have something go wrong and someone's dying, it's good to weep. And we'll find out that Jesus wept. But Martha had that extra step, if you like, which lifted her gaze upwards, and she could see, and she had hope. Mary stayed at his feet, weeping. And again, I had another sense from the Lord to those who feel that an opportunity is gone and who feel what they were promised has completely slipped away and gone. Are you staying in your weeping? Are you just staying lamenting? Remember who Jesus is. Remember whose feet you're at. Remind yourself of what he has said to you. Remind yourself of what he has spoken over your life in the past. Remind yourself of those words. Activate that faith. State your belief. And let your laughter replace your tears. Now we're going to get into some exciting stuff about Jesus, about his responses and his actions. So verses 33 to 44. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. Now we've got the shortest verse and sentence in the Bible. 35, Jesus wept. On to 36. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? And then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, but Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he's been dead for 4 days. Remember Martha, grounded in reality. And then Jesus says to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? You see how Jesus is the difference there? His words, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And that statement led them to take away the stone. You see, there's that practical outworking of faith. It would have taken faith to take that stone away, okay? I would struggle to open up something if someone had been dead inside for 4 days. I think I'd need Jesus to say, take away the stone. And then Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around me, that they may believe you sent me. And when he has said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Wow, freedom. So, deeply moved. He saw Mary weeping. He was deeply moved and greatly troubled. Well, this is one of those passages that hasn't translated well from the original Hebrew and the Greek. So, I know people who've been deeply moved by looking at a painting or watching a video of a dog on YouTube take a kitten under its paw and look after it. And I know people who've been greatly troubled by their neighbour's sofa cushions. Or trying to just choose what coffee to have in that morning. And actually, when you get down to the basis of these words and what they actually mean, it's a lot more than being deeply moved and greatly troubled. D.A. Carson's quite a famous theologian, and he says it like this: in extra biblical Greek, it can refer to the snorting of horses. You know, I mean, has anyone ever seen a horse snort? Stamp its hoof? You've been around a horse that's done that? Okay, that horse is saying, just give me a bit of space, right? Something has annoyed it. It's angry. And I've seen it with a bull as well. I've seen a bull do the same thing. I've also seen that same bull, which weighed over half a ton, flick another one over a fence that also weighed half a ton. And before, you know, they stamp, they snort, they let you know that they are not happy. All right? Greatly troubled. It didn't translate well. So as applied to human beings, it invariably suggests anger, outrage, emotional indignation. It is lexically inexcusable to reduce this emotional upset to the effects of empathy, grief, pain, or the like. Okay, so Jesus was expressing a deep anger, like an indignation. He was angered. So at what? Well, he was angered at death, for one, and the unbelief. He was angered at the grief. He was angered at the suffering that was caused by death, because death was never God's intention. It was never in God's original design for humanity. Death came in with the fall. Death came in with sin. It was offending the divinity that was in Jesus. It was offending the Godhead that was in Christ. And he was seeing this. But it does go on to say that Jesus wept as well. So as well as feeling anger and indignation, he was also upset. He was upset. He was troubled by the sadness he was seeing, and that affected him. There was empathy there. But he wasn't just weeping just because he saw others weeping. My own personal belief after digging into this is that he was foreseeing what was going to happen to him as well. This whole story is like a precursor. It's like a sort of dress rehearsal, if you like, for what he would go on to do on the cross. You know, when he saw Mary at his feet weeping, he saw his mother weeping at the foot of the cross. And when he saw the Jews gathered round him, that multitude all weeping with Mary, he saw his disciples gathered round him at the cross, weeping because they were losing their leader. That's what it would have felt like to them. And when he saw the stone, if you look at the timing of when they talk about his emotions, you know, he was deeply moved again when it came to the tomb. You know, when he sees that stone, he's seeing his own stone. He's seeing his own tomb. He knows what he is going to go through. He knows what is before him. And he knows what is before those who are part of all of this. So, why did Jesus do this? Why did he let Lazarus die? Well, it's because of God's greater purpose. Ultimately, Jesus knew that Lazarus would be raised, that he would come back to life, and that there would be joy in that. But he ultimately knew that there was a greater purpose. There was the Father's will, the Father's plan. And also because he knew that he and the Father would be glorified through it. And in them being glorified through it, he knew that many would be glorified through it, that Jesus would go to his death, and many would come to life through that. That verse where it says, unless a single grain of wheat falls down to the ground and dies, it will not bear fruit. You know, unless it falls down to the ground and dies, it won't bear fruit. Yeah, that was Jesus saying, unless I die, unless I go to the cross, there will be no others that will come to life. Jesus knew that in giving life to Lazarus, he was sealing his own death on the cross. And I think this was also serving for his followers as a reminder. It was for them to look back on and think, he showed us what was going to happen. That was to encourage them when it happened to Christ as well. And it's also a demonstration of what happens when we believe, when we take a step and step out in faith with Jesus. You know, it says, for you were dead in your transgressions and sins. And Jesus says elsewhere about how I've come that they may have life and life in the fullness. I was dead before I met Jesus. Not physically. I haven't physically died and been risen. But spiritually, I was dead. I was in that tomb. I remember it clearly. And I remember when I met Jesus for the first time, when I called out to him in that tomb, and he rolled the stone away, and he called me out into the light. He said, "James, come out." And I came out and stepped into the light. And it felt like I had seen for the first time. It was incredible. It felt like I was alive fully for the first time. And then he unbound me and said, "Go and be free," just like he did with Lazarus. So if you know Jesus, if you're listening to this and you know Jesus, just remember who he is. Remember who he is. Remember his question, do you believe this? Do you believe? Do you believe me? Just remember that. Remember what he stated. Remember what he's done. Raise your faith. Have that expectation that he will move. Remember Martha. She had that expectation. Even when, as Cleo was saying earlier, about disappointments, about things not going right. You know, we have all had those moments in our lives. In fact, Claire and myself and the family, we wouldn't really be in Devon if we hadn't gone through a Lazarus moment. It was a story for another time, but God had called us out somewhere. We went out there and it completely just blew up and did not end up at all in the way that we imagined. And we were like, ooh, it was a proper Lazarus experience. It all just died. But then God raised it to life in a different way. I'm sure every believer here has Lazarus stories. And I'm sure some of you are walking through the disappointments and you're in that stage. Well, remember Martha's response. Remember who Jesus is and what he said. He has not left you. He has not forsaken you. He is true to his word always, always. And if you don't know Jesus, I would just encourage you to give him your life and let him lead you out of that grave. Let him lead you out of that darkness. Let him bring you into the light. Let him unbind you. Listen to that voice. And if it's all fairy tales, you've lost nothing, have you? Really? Because nothing will happen. And you're like, yeah, it's just fairy tales. And you can carry on. It's like, yeah. But if it is real, and you do find yourself stepping out of the darkness that you didn't even know you were in, and you step into light that you didn't even know was there, then you've gained everything. So yeah, remember who Jesus is. Praise the Lord. Right.